How many remember your first car? When you got the keys to the car. You remember what it was? What was yours, Walt? You didn't raise your hand.
Well, I was driving in 1947. It was a Nash.
Nash.
And wooden bumpers because metal was still being given to the war effort.
Oh, okay. All
I
right.
managed to pull into a stride, and I was looking back like this, and I hooked the bumper onto a
Nice.
metal post, and boing, and it pulled off, and pulled the 2x6 off, and my mother had words for me.
I'll bet. He didn't have zip ties back then, or duct tape. He didn't have zip ties or duct tape. So how'd you fix it?
I took the crush and put 2x6 home,
There we go.
and just said, Mom, look what I did.
There we go. Well,
After I went.
my first car was this. It was a 1967 Trans Am, or actually Firebird. It was the first year. But it almost looked like that after I got done with it because it actually had gone through, I got it in 1974, so it was 7 years old. It had 110,000 miles. I wasn't 16 yet. My grandfather gave it to me when I turned 15 and a half, and it needed, we had literally put 65 pounds of Bondo in it. Yes. And it was 2-speed, rag top, and I actually asked Linda, it's like, do we have a picture of that car? And she's like, honey, that was before you were dating me. So who was the name of the girl that you weren't taking out then? Which is like, not really, because I was looking for it, because it was a sweet car, and it was a 2-speed. It frustrated me, but it was the first year for the Firebird. It was a great car. Wasn't it then? Yeah, it was a classic. I sort of wish I had it now. And then the one Melinda remembers, and I couldn't find a picture of this, is that I traded that for a Ford Torino, and then traded the Ford Torino in for a K5 Blazer with really big tires, and we could pull the roof off and go mud running. That's the thing that Melinda remembers. But so this morning, what I want to do is, and it's not that somebody asked me earlier this week. I said we're going to lean into a conversation about growing young. It's like, did you find the fountain of youth? It's like, no, didn't. But I want to talk about, it's actually a book that just came out that I've been really waiting for from some friends of mine at Fuller Youth Institute at Fuller Seminary on the West Coast. It's called Growing Young, 6 Essential Strategies to Help Young People Discover and Love Your Church. And I just want to spend the next couple weeks, this is going to be more of a conversation maybe. I'm just going to lay out some ideas of what I had a couple weeks here before we start our fall generosity series. And I just want to lay out a couple things. I'm going to pull 2 chapters out of the book just to sort of lay out there in front of you. Thank you. I'm going to pull on some of the information that you folks got an email from Nikki on behalf of me about, sent out sort of a questionnaire, and we're going to use a little bit of that, and more to sort of help us see that, and this is why I think this book is so critical, is, and you've heard me say this, but the season that we live in right now, where we find ourselves, culturally, politically, religiously, spiritually, you name it, economically, everyone's been trying to figure out what does this mean for us? What does it mean for us individually? I'm not going to go very far with this, but the revelations of the political realm yesterday is sort of outrageous to think that we live in this day where this is just where we find ourselves, and where do we go with this? At the same time, I'm reminded, as a friend, Mark Zimmerman, posted this morning this morning from Shane Claiborne, who's a well-known sort of guy out there in the church, saying we need to think about things in a fresh way. Shane is I believe he's a Jesuit priest in Philadelphia, been doing some interesting things, but just basically, Jesus is in control, amen? So it doesn't make any difference what happens a month from now politically, that we as Christ followers need to lean into that. So that's even why over the last 4 weeks, we sort of ran through this conversation, literally, as we talked about resetting our hearts to focus on Jesus, resetting our minds to think about Jesus, resetting our voices to talk about Jesus, and then resetting our hands and feet. And literally, thank you again to all of you that took place in the crop walk, because I know I was encouraged. I was tired. 13,000 steps is a lot. But it's that's why we do these things. And I don't know about, you can ask Jane, I think for the two of us as we walk together, in the midst of all these students and these younger people, they give you energy, and yeah, you want to keep up. And I'll tell you, don't know if you saw it in the video, but as we came down past St. Luke's Point of Grace, there were two boys who had brought out this aquarium full of, they called it treasure, and they had laid out, it was everything you could possibly think of, stones and bottle caps and just all sorts of little knickknacks, and these boys laid it out on the bench, and it was their gift to us, and it was so cool to see their joy of just giving us something for blessing others, and it really wasn't that much energy to really expend. To think that we basically took an hour and 10 minutes, and then we got to ride the carousel, and how cool that is, and that's really what the community is supposed to be about. But let's begin with this. As Kara Powell and her team begin to unpack the idea behind this book, and it was 4 years of research. It was 400 churches nationwide. It was big churches, little churches. It was traditional churches. It was mega contemporary churches. And they sort of whittled it down to coming up with some key concepts. And so the first 10 things that they laid out was like, what things don't we need as a church to grow young? And so here, in no particular order, is first of all, it doesn't make a difference how big we are. It doesn't matter where we find ourselves, whether we're on Park Avenue or at the corner of Maple and Linden. It doesn't matter how old we are as a church, whether we're going to celebrate in a couple of years, 200 years, or whether we're a church plant like my friend Joby's doing in Jacksonville, where they canceled church this morning because there's water in the basement and lots of other stuff going on. It's not about a cool denomination. It's not about a non-denomination or a denomination. And it's not about off-the-charts cool quotient. And really what they're talking about that is where the lead pastor wears, skinny jeans and rides a motorcycle because, I ride a bicycle, but that's about as much as I get there. It's not about that, nor is it about a big modern building. It's not about a big budget. It's not about a contemporary worship gathering. The music does impact, but they found within both contexts, both traditional and contemporary, and it's not a watered-down teaching style. In fact, it's more about those that lean into that we're going to teach about Jesus is really, really important, or that it's a hyper-entertaining ministry, and you can see this stuff. I mean, there's some churches that every week it's some crazy thing on the platform that just to engage people. And yet, at the same time, they found that there were 6 things. They whittled it down to 6 things, and I'm going to pick 2 of them. This week we're going to talk about just sort of what they call Keychain Leadership. But here's the 6 things. And I know those of you that like to write notes, I'll actually put this in next week's sermon outline for you. This week as I was pushing into it, I just wasn't sure because the book literally just came out and I wanted to sort of leverage it. But here's the 6 things they found in the churches that were growing young and what they had in common. First of all, they unlocked Keychain Leadership, and we'll unpack that here in a minute. They empathize with today's young people. Now, what's interesting there is, you think about this, you think about those of you that voted in the 1964 campaign, or the 1968 campaign, or the 1972 campaign. You think about the issues that were in front of you politically in those days versus what's in front of us today. You think about the character of the candidates who are running for office. And that's what I mean. You think about how messy our world is, realizing that many kids today, they're delaying marriage, they're delaying vocation, they're actually literally moving back home to their parents' basements at age 30 because they're not quite sure what to do. Because the world outside the walls of the things we've trusted is kind of messy. Third point, this is the churches that take Jesus' message seriously are ones that are growing young, that understand what it means to love God and to love others. That they fuel a warm community, that they prioritize young people in all that they're doing, and that number 6, they want to be the best neighbors. And so this morning, I'm going to just pull out the first one, and it's not in any particular order. I just think that this is the piece that we all face because it's like getting the keys to the car. I can remember when my grandfather handed me the keys to the car and said, "It's yours," but there was one caveat. I was 15 and a half, which meant I didn't have a driver's license. I couldn't drive it. The other problem was the bumper was off of it because it had gone through Kent State for 7 years. It looked like the Dickens. It was rust, and he's like, "You can't drive it until it's painted and looks like new." And it's like, really? So fortunately, we owned a chain of gas stations, and one of them was actually a repair shop, a garage down there. They finally just tore it down here recently in front of the jail there on East Main Street in Ashland. But I learned a lot from Roy Hendershot. You can fix anything with a ball-peen hammer and a torch. It's just that simple. Maybe a pair of ice grips. Anything goes wrong with the car. He was this guy who started in the oil fields and then came to work for us as a grease monkey, and he poured a lot into me along with my dad and my grandfather, and we had a lot of fun restoring that car. I don't know if it's as much fun as Doug or Dennis has had in terms of doing like MGs and all these other things you got, but it's equally frustrating because you try to get it. And then what happened was actually somebody stole the bumpers that I had found it had it behind the station, and so I had to go find new bumpers, and of course that was my fault. It's just like I should have had them locked up. And anyhow, it's like, isn't this stuff fun? Not so much. But in unpacking this, here's why this matters, because here's the three questions that today's youth are asking. And I'm talking about youth being people 15 through 29. And yet you'll see that really these questions go beyond that age group. But here's the three questions. Who am I? Where do I fit in? And what difference do I make? Which is basically this idea of who am I is my identity, who I am. Where do I fit in? In other words, where do I belong? That's us together, community. And what purpose do I make? Where do I make a difference? And it's really our world. And yet, if you think about it, I think those of us that are on the other side of 29, is that you, Dennis?
I think so.
Yeah. We're still trying to figure this, right? Who am I? Where do I fit in? What difference do I make? Partly because of the season of life we find ourselves in, because of what life does to us. Because life, all we can really, like I say this to students all the time, all we can really do is control our response to what life is doing, because we don't have any real control over those things that come at us every day. And yet, it's really important that I want to take us back to a story of Scripture, because it really is grounded in that understanding of our messiness that we have to keep leaning back into. Because again, we don't know what life is going to throw at us. Physically, emotionally, relationally. And so this morning I want us to look at one particular story. It comes to us out of John. And here's where I want to set it up as I read it to you, is that it's the story of Peter and Jesus at the very end. It's after the resurrection. That in the midst of our brokenness and failure, we're going to see that Jesus invites Peter to take the keys of leadership and continue the work. Now, again, to set this context up before I read it, you've got to remember it's after the resurrection. This is Peter. Peter the knucklehead. Peter the one who denied Christ 3 times. Peter the one who thought he had nothing to offer the kingdom. And what's incredible in that moment, after the resurrection, after Jesus has fixed him breakfast, he asks Peter to take a walk with him. But before I go there, let me pray. Father, as we look at this amazing story of your son walking with one of your disciples, we just pray that it would be new and fresh for us. That we, this morning, as people who want to grow young, we want to remain energetic. We want to engage each other in the kingdom in a very healthy way. I just pray your Holy Spirit would lead us through this conversation. And as we think about the fact that we do have brokenness in our lives, that can we look at the story of Peter to remind us that despite our brokenness, that you're going to use that you're going to leverage it in a way that's going to move us, to move our community and to move each other into an amazing opportunity of serving and loving you. We just thank you for that privilege. Send your Holy Spirit now in Christ's name. Amen. So let's just read through this. After great breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know that I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. And a third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt. Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, then feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you were old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. And then Jesus told him, follow me. So I want you to think about this for a minute. As I was trying to unpack this for myself. 3 times Jesus has to have this conversation. And if you were Peter, I think you would feel the same way, right? Okay, I get it the first time, I answer the question. The second time, okay, I don't know where he's going. And maybe if you're married, you have this conversation at home. Where your spouse asks you a question, and you really know there's a question behind the question, right? Or maybe there's a question behind the question behind the question. And so it's like, why you ask that question? And then, you can see that Peter, in his own mind with his journey, is really struggling with, okay, where do I go? And so I want to try to offer us a couple things, because it's that first bullet point that in the midst of brokenness and failure, Jesus invites Peter to take the keys of leadership and keep doing the good work. You see, Peter has walked with Jesus from the beginning, and it appeared like he was on the inside track for successful ministry, and then literally it all fell apart. All hell came loose. And after the resurrection, Peter is literally wallowing in the aftermath of his 3-time denial of Jesus. So do you think it's interesting that he denies Christ 3 times, and Christ asks him 3 times, do you love me? Do you think there's a correlation there? Probably. You see, Jesus reminds us of this simple fact. That's the next point here. And we need to see this because it's about his handing it off to us. That Jesus is the shepherd, and he hands the keys of the kingdom to his followers to help care for and lead others. Now, that's a risky idea. Because in leading others means, like my parents and like my grandfather, when PH handed me the keys, there's a risk there. There's a risk that first of all, the insurance, all that thing, it's just, and literally, but in doing that, it empowers us. When I received those keys, even with the stipulations, you got to get the work done, it was like, this is my car. And I'm going to work, and I'm going to learn, I'm going to understand. And I had to put a new transmission in it after I drove it for 2 months. Okay, it's, 2-speed, doesn't go very fast. It's those burnouts, I guess. I don't know. Clorox, you ever use Clorox tenants on your Corvette? It's a risky idea to hand off leadership. Yet at the same time, that's what hinders us. That what hinders us is our failures and our feelings that somehow we aren't quite good enough. And so this morning, what I want us to see, all of us together, young and old. And I just want you to know, shout out to the teens, you'll see who's sitting in the front row. It's kind of interesting that in the first 2 rows we have the youngest and the most mature. And the rest of you, I'm not sure where you fit in that, but figure it out maybe next week. But seriously, the idea they're down front here I think shows that they want to be part of this larger conversation. And I'm so grateful for that. So here in this text, Jesus sees the worth in Peter as a necessary contributor to the kingdom, regardless of his failure. He realizes that before he heads out of here and heads to heaven, that he has to take Peter one-on-one and encourage him, because we know that he tells him, Peter, you are the rock, and upon you I'm going to build this church. And then you think about, as we've journeyed over the couple of years here, and what you've done in our adult ed time downstairs, is looking at this, like, how crazy is it that a couple guys hanging out on the side of a lake in Jerusalem or in Israel ends up changing the world literally, and we're still trying to figure it out. But see, here's the question that comes up then, is really as we lean into this, and it's simply this: who gets to lead, and who should be invited to lead? I know within our tradition and within our book of order, we have certain things that we do in a certain way. But let me just stretch you a little bit. We're coming up to think about next year's election of officers, elders, deacons. If we're a church who say we value youth, what risk are we willing to take to think about putting a young person on session? Or putting a young person on deacons? Now, here's the problem with that, is that doing it on deacons, for example, they meet on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. If you tap a teen to serve on that, it means you're going to have to take a little bit of risk and figure out how to lean into it differently. And I'm not saying that's where we're going to go. I'm just saying that if we really are going to ask others to help lead us in this next season of life for us as we begin leaning into we've talked about our 200th anniversary, those are the kinds of questions we have to wrestle with. It's that question, who are we willing to give the keys to? Realizing that we give the keys to, that they may not do what we want done, that they may fail at our expectations, and that we need to be reminded daily that that's okay. Because Jesus walked with his amazing disciple who failed him miserably, and yet in that, there was that transfer of leadership. And the thing that I want to make sure, and I see this across the board within us as a church, is that I believe people from young to old, everywhere across the spectrum, they want to be part of something larger. They want to be something, they want to even take responsibility, even though they may not know what that responsibility looks like. So I want to look into this research that Fuller did as just sort of a springboard for conversation. Fuller basically identified 15 to 29-year-olds as being young people, and looked at them, interviewed them, 10,000 pages of research that was done over the last 4 years. And then this book has come out to sort of begin to talk about, okay, what churches, what faith communities are really leveraging, and it begins first with that keychain. That idea of being willing to risk, to hand off the leadership. Not that we want to put them in power, but that we want to walk, because today I think especially it's much flatter. And it's not about somebody at the top and people under them, but it really is about somebody as the vision caster, like the shepherd, we're going to look at that here in a moment, who leads us in a certain way, but we're going together because we're trying to understand in our own perspective. N.T. Wright, who some of us have read, says this, and I've got the quote in your worship notes. He's a New Testament professor from England. He says, talking about this particular passage, he says this, a fresh challenge. It's a new commission. It's a time to learn how to be a shepherd. It's time to feed lambs and sheep, to look after them. Not only is this a fresh commission, not only is Jesus trusting Peter to get back to fruitful work and to turn his undoubted, though wildly love for Jesus to good account, it is more Jesus is sharing his own work, his own ministry with Peter. And see, I think that's the thing that we forget about sometimes, is we think it's our ministry. We think we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. No. We do this corporately together for the kingdom. That's why I said last week, and I'm glad some of you resonated with Pastor Tom's not going to do the crop walk by himself. Because in the midst of everything else I had to do that day, it was a delight. It was a delight to bless Margaret as one of the organizers, as part of the core team, to bless our members that walked. And I was proud. I was proud of the folks that signed their name. And I'm proud of those of you that maybe couldn't go, that actually, that you put some of your treasure in the offering plate so that we could leverage that. Now, are we going to eradicate hunger? No, we know that. But it's more about our faithfulness and willing to be that kind of neighbor to love others. You see, it's more about sharing in Christ's work and his own ministry than it is about doing our own ministry. So the text here leads us into a couple things. And it really is this. It's an invitation. I found out how to fill in blanks on my software, so I'm doing something new here this morning. So if it helps. The invitation extended to us as followers of Jesus is to take the keys of the kingdom offered to us and to use them. So we all have been given, like last week, the example was M&Ms. And Dennis didn't get any, so Nikki, you need to make sure we get him a handful out of your office, because there's a bunch of them there. Because the idea of the M&Ms last week was to sort of give you a visual to go, we sometimes think we just have this little snack pack, and we need to be reminded as Christ followers that we really have, how many M&Ms did I say are produced today? Remember? 400 million. There's a lot of M&Ms to go around. And I was pretty excited this week because Melinda finished up her clinicals and she brought home a bag of gifts from her students. And there was a bag of M&Ms laying on right on my phone this morning. It's like, yes. But the idea of those of us that are a little more mature are the shepherds. And so as we think about it, and I know we've been trying to do this, but I want us to take courage and encouragement from the fact that what Kendra and her folks at FYI have been saying, Fuller, is that everyone's trying to figure this out. Because the culture in which we find ourselves today doesn't look like what it did. And unfortunately, as soon as we think we've got it figured out, it changes. And the beauty that I found within this church as Linden Road is that I really believe as we've walked together on almost, well, literally, I think it's 2 years this week coming up, and this conversation, as I walk with you as your pastor, is really trying to understand what is God calling us to be and do, given who we have to work with, given who is here on Sunday morning, given who is here in the course of the week, and it's the responsibility we have. And so I want to show you a short video about a gentleman who became a shepherd. And I want to see if there's some things we can learn from this as we journey this morning. So, did you hear what he had to say there? I mean, did it resonate with you, this idea that it begins sort of just like where Peter found himself with Jesus? I don't think I have anything to offer. You know, how do I be a shepherd? And what's incredible as you follow the documentary here of 4 minutes is that through his journey, through his faithfulness, through his leaning in, through his being uncomfortable, he began to learn, first of all, by what? What kind of sheep did he pick? What kind of sheep did he pick? Skinny, broken, ones that nobody else wanted. And through his generosity, through his faithfulness, he brought them to health so that he could provide for his family. To the point of which, then, who shows up at his door? His neighbor. His neighbor who has sheep that look the same way and says, can you help me with mine? And you think about the things that he's leaning to in his village, the brokenness in his village, the brokenness of alcoholism, the brokenness of broken families, of divorce. How much is that different, even though it's probably 9,000 miles around the backside of the world, how much is that different than our community? Where I read this week that it took, like one guy in Columbus, it took 25 doses of Narcan to bring the guy back. And yet the same story said that he went right back unused the next day. It's like, I don't get that. And as we've had Valerie and Stan here to share it, and I don't know where that goes, and I know Sherrod Brown is here on Thursday, and I've been invited into a conversation over at the high school with some others just to think through how do we respond to it. And I don't know the answer, other than I know this much, it's Jesus. And that Jesus is literally depending on us to figure this out. And it may make some of you uncomfortable because what it's going to take, it's going to take your resources to make that happen. It's going to take your time and your talent. It's going to take your treasures. But it's interesting, as I was listening to Kara, she did a podcast a couple weeks ago with Carrie Newhoff, some of you know, and we've read a couple of Carrie's books. But it's interesting that she said that those churches that are finding their purpose of growing young are finding out that it's the 50 and 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds who are taking joy and energy out of the fact that they get to invest in the next generation. And in particular, and Carrie says, I know this isn't going to be a popular statement, but for those that are 50 and older, they have to stop thinking that it's about them. That the beauty of the kingdom is about us inviting others into it. So that's why we get uncomfortable and we go and do a 3.5-mile walk around the city. Now, it gets complicated, I realize, because not all of us can do that. But there's other things we can do. And it may mean that out of our time and our talent and our treasures, that we can lean into that together. And so this morning, as we sort of wrap up here, as we think about what does this look like, it's part of this. The next fill-in is that it's also, it invites us to recognize that the gifts of those around us, all of us, young and old, inviting them into the role that they get to play in the journey of our faithful community into God's future. It's not our future, it's God's future. That's why the sobering impact, and we're going to do this on the Sunday before election. We're going to spend some time praying for our nation, because quite honestly, I couldn't sleep last night because I'm thinking about where we find ourselves. And yet I know from my travels to Kenya that all these folks in third world countries are looking for us to give answers. And if the answers are what a man gives on a bus in privacy in the middle, someplace where he doesn't think anybody's listening to him, that is a problem. And God is going to hold us accountable for that. There is a world that's looking to us because we're Americans. And our Americanism is grounded upon certain fundamental principles. That we're not cows and dogs. That we're human beings created in the image of a holy God. And that's why being neighbors and loving God matters. And so that's why this conversation of how do we continue to lean into that. Because I do grow young. I was tired. But I tell you what, last Sunday after going home, I literally went out and did 20 miles on my bike because there was energy in the fact of walking and sharing and riding the merry-go-round. There was beauty in that to see the impact that we make in the kingdom. And to remind you that we all have a part to play. That there is this larger thing, this story, if you will, the upper story and the lower story that you've worked through before, that we all have a part to play. We get to invite others. What an amazing opportunity to join in the work of the kingdom with us. How cool is that? We don't have to do it by ourselves. It's an amazing opportunity for us to lean in together to be what God desires for us. Now, I just want to I want to put up on the screen a couple of the stats that I pulled from your survey. 24 respondents. So here's one of the first ones. Linden Road equips young people with the skills they need to lead ministries. 41% of us said that's moderately true. 12%, it's very true. Actually, one person said it's completely true. But equally, almost 40%, do the math, I guess what? 41 said that it's not true. And so part of it is, and the one thing I didn't do, these are always difficult to do, is I probably should have put an age breakdown there so that we could figure out who's giving us these responses. And this we simply set out to our email list. And so everyone's on there that has email that participated. Here's the second question. Linden Roads invests sufficient resources in programming for young people. Again, 45% moderately true. One person said completely true, but you can see equally folks don't buy that either. Now, I don't know that it's about dollars. I actually think as I've begun to read this book and as I've thought with other people, it's not necessarily about money. It's about time and talent. It's about the conversation that hopefully we're going to have later this week with Betsy and with Linda to give some shape and some organization to what our students, our older students, what they should be doing. And for those of you that serve downstairs in the kids ministry, I just want you to see how valuable the role is that you play every week in doing that. And then here's just a third point. Linden Road values young people's presence in our main worship gathering. We say that's very true, but you can see it's almost, there's still a portion of us that don't think that's true. And so that's okay because, again, we don't have to all agree in this thing. We all don't have to come together and say, yes, we're all in 100% in the sense that I buy this, other than to say we're going to trust that God's going to lead us in the right direction. And that it's imperfect. And as soon as we map out a plan to go in one direction, life happens and we have to go in another direction. It drives me nuts. But I think if we're going to be a church that wants to reach our community, we have to think through those things. And we have to think through those things well. And then also think through them with the understanding that we may have to turn and go in a different direction. It's interesting that, and I want to leave you with one question here to wrestle through. As I was listening to Kara walk through this, they said that in the churches where they really understand this idea of growing young, whenever the church comes about programming, the first question that the majority of the churches ask is this: how does this program or this project relate to what God is doing in our young people? How does this program or project relate to what God is doing in our young people? And that it's in that point that it actually pushes them down a trajectory. She tells a story about how one of the churches that she had to go visit was a predominantly Latino church, Baptist, Pentecostal Baptist. She said they were rockin' Pentecostal Baptist. She'd never been in a place like that. Predominantly older. But one of the things they found out was that this church of 200 realized that if they were going to meet the next generation's needs, that they decided they were going to have to start using English as a second language in the sanctuary. And that for some of their members who were older, that was going to be a problem. And yet what was amazing is in the interviews with those older members, they said, that's okay because I take joy out of watching the younger children and the students engage at a different level. So I may not understand the liturgy, I may not understand the songs, but that's okay. I'm in the building and there's energy that I get that comes from that. You know, we need to move beyond this idea of what's in it for me. Because I can't tell you a better way of infusing life than going to hang out with the grandkids or going to hang out. They wear you out. I understand. I don't have anybody. I understand that. And there's moments when you need to be away from them. But the beauty of that and what that brings each of us is really, really important. And that what's actually interesting in the churches that they followed in this is that it actually brings more time, talent, and treasures. Because people say, I want to be part of something like that. And so this morning, I guess I want us to really wrestle through that question as we end. What is in it for me? Is it about my comfort level and where I find myself? Or is it the words that Jesus gives to Peter, I want to give you the keys to the kingdom, and I want you to go love my sheep. And the tension of that, and what that offers us. And I know we don't always like to be in tension, but it's in those moments of tension where if we trust the Holy Spirit, we will grow. And again, if you could sit with me and think about, as Peter was invited by Jesus to walk along the water, and this is after the resurrection, you can only imagine what Peter must have been feeling in his very being. And yet, even being challenged, at the same time, Jesus' final words to him were what? Follow me. And so in that, let us follow Christ. This morning, just to help us think about that, the song I want to use is a song we've sung before, Salvation's Tide. And just to be present in the idea of what it is we're inviting God to be a part of. And what we want to journey together as a faith community here, and also a faith community in Mansfield and in the larger world. So you may remain seated, but sing as you feel led.